Welcome to Channel 8 News, and with my co-host Chris Metzger, I'm Gene Castleberg. And on this last day of 1979, we recap the whole decade we call the 70s.
Thanks, Gene. Indeed, this was the best decade that the U.S. has encountered so far. From fashion to science and sports to television, we've seen some incredible things.
As we have. And now, we'll swing it over to Chris for fashion and hairstyles.
Thanks. Fashion throughout the 1970s has been the best we've ever seen. We've seen a conversion to a new era of casual clothing, while still looking dapper. The best, most revolutionary change for men came with the new slim fit clothes. As the decade progressed, men's clothing became tighter and tighter, especially their slacks. The bottoms of the pants, however, were flared out in a loose-fitting fashion. The collars and ties became wider, while the pants became tighter. Women also changed their clothes severely. Pants are now what's hip in today's society among women. Flip through any catalog that you see, and pants are the most prevalent advertisement out there. Although pants may have been worn more throughout this glorious decade, it will probably be remembered for the use of dresses and skirts. In these past 10 years, we've seen an increase in bright color, flowering dresses and skirts. Dresses have been higher than we've ever seen in American history, which us men are not complaining about. Right, boys? I think that the most revolutionary article of clothing in this decade are the plazo pants. These pants, that resemble a dress when the lady's legs are side by side, are a symbol of the ingenuity of the decade. Much of the clothes that these young studs wear were made of polyester or a blend of polyester and cotton. The 70s showed a wide variety of hairstyles, especially for women. These styles included long and natural, the shag hairstyle, feathered hairstyles, the wedge, and the afro. The long and natural look is pretty self-explanatory. These women would often change it up the look by throwing in a headband. These headbands sat at the top of their foreheads where their hairline began. The shag hairstyle differed completely from the 60s. This messy look was displayed by actress Jane Fonda. This revolutionary cut was really a wash-and-go style, as one of the few accessories found in this were barrettes that could be purchased at any local five and dime store. Feathered hairstyles were, in my opinion, the best looking. Actress Farrah Fawcett shows off this gorgeous look of lots of hair throughout the century. The look consists of a high quantity of hair with high volume. The wedge cut, rocked by ice skater Dorothy Hamill, was a new icon for girls around the century, as it was easy to care for and looked sporty and dressy. The last of the popular hairstyles of the 70s was the afro, sported by mostly black women or women with frizzy hair. It poofed up instead of flowing down. The Jackson 5 have been seen with this look for years. And now, back over to Gene with talk about music and architecture.
So, music in the 1970s was revolutionary, and out of it came some of the greatest hits of all time. Most of it was driven by disco, which incorporated elements such as funk, pop, and soul music. My personal favorite is Stayin' Alive by Bee Gees. There's so many more hits of the 1970s, like Piano Man by Billy Joel, Bohemian Rhapsody, American Woman, I Will Survive, Sweet Home Alabama, and so many more that make the 1970s music so great. Architecture also made great strides during the 1970s. Brutalism was a major style that architects used when designing office buildings or large corporate buildings in the city. There were many notorious buildings that were completed in the 1970s. The first one on your left is the Trans-America Pyramid, completed in 1972, and it is the tallest building in the San Francisco skyline, standing at 855 feet tall. The Trans-America Corporation's headquarters can be found here. The building in the middle, the Willis Tower, or known as the Sears Tower, completed in 1973, is the tallest building in the world, holding strong at 1,451 feet tall. This building was built in order to consolidate thousands of Sears employees into one central building. And last but not least, the two buildings on your right, One World Trade Center and Two World Trade Center. They completed in early 1973 and were the tallest buildings in the world until the completion of the Willis Tower later that year. They both stand at 1,368 feet tall. Meanwhile, in-home architecture was on the rise, and new trends such as open floor plans and sunken living rooms were taking effect. Others, like big windows, grand entrances, second-floor balconies, and high-vaulted ceilings, were a notorious 1970s in-home architectural trend. Literature was marked by brilliant novelists such as John Gardner and Alice Walker, but arguably the most controversial book in the 1970s was Ball 4, written by Jim Bouton. In his book, he uncovers all the scandal in baseball at the time while tarnishing the reputations of some. Alright, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue looking back on the best decade in history, the 1970s.
The 70s experienced a rise in living standards as well as an increase in wages. However, we've been put through a period of stagflation and higher unemployment. Stagflation comes with a high inflation combined with a high unemployment rate and a stagnant demand in the country's economy. Unemployment, unfortunately, rose to almost 8%. In this upcoming decade, however, we look to drop that number significantly. Strikers, such as the miners' strikes, gave more power back to the worker. Wages, thankfully, have been rising throughout the decade. Due to this rise in wages, owning a house has become a lot more appealing. This led to a rapid increase in houses due to people starting to take out mortgages. Unfortunately, gas prices have also been rising. As a whole, we took the low prices of gas for granted in the early years in the 70s, but now we have to be cautious with our gas. The implementation of the speed limit has helped conserve some petroleum while possibly angering the aggressive drivers out there. The use of credit cards has made paying a whole lot easier. It has helped me with buying on credit, although that can be disastrous for many people. I know my wife isn't allowed to have one due to her spending tantrum on short skirts.
Movies were a great way for a family to spend leisure time, sitting with a bowl of popcorn in hand and enjoying great movies. Before, pretty much all movies were suitable for all ages, but once R-rated became a thing, movies started to become adult-oriented, starting with classics like The Godfather and Jaws. More fantastic flicks premiered such as Star Wars, Rocky, and Patton. By the time the 1970s rolled around, almost every family had a television inside their homes. This led to massive influx of TV shows during this decade called situation comedies, or sitcoms. They were mostly clean in terms of subject matter until the groundbreaking All in the Family showed for the first time. It discussed changes in American society at the time, and people loved that. This will go down as one of the greatest shows of all time. There were many other great sitcoms that premiered in the 1970s, such as The Brady Bunch, Sanford and Son, Mary Tyler Moore Show, and Happy Days. Hey, sports in this decade were marked by both tragedies and triumph. Sadly, in 1970, a plane carrying 37 players and 8 coaches of the Marshall football team went down, killing all 75 people on board. Despite this, the team was able to rebuild, winning 2 games the next year. Then, in 1972, at the Olympic Games in Munich, 8 Palestinian terrorists kidnapped 11 Israeli Olympic team members and killed 2 of them. In a failed rescue attempt, the rest were killed. Later that year, Roberto Clemente, the first Latino to win a World Series game as a starter, died in a plane crash on his way to Puerto Rico for mission work. His body was never recovered. On a brighter note, Mark Spitz was the symbol of dominance in the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. He set a record with 7 gold medals in 7 different swimming events. He also set world records in all of his events. In 1973, Secretariat became the 9th Triple Crown winner, setting record times in all of those races. It won the final race of the Triple Crown, the Belmont Stakes, by a whopping 31 horse lengths. In 1974, Hank Aaron hit his 715th home run, surpassing Babe Ruth for the most all time. Football in the early 1970s was huge. Everyone watched on Sunday afternoons with their families around the TV. The later half of the 1970s belonged to the Pittsburgh Steelers, winning 3 Super Bowls during this time. But the greatest accomplishment in football history goes to the Miami Dolphins, who in 1973 became the only team to have an undefeated season, going a perfect 17-0, and it was capped off with a Super Bowl victory. And after this quick break, I'll be back to talk to you about social issues during this decade, and later, Chris will discuss science and technology of the time. You will not want to miss it, so stick with us on Channel 8 News. Welcome back, everyone. Now I'm going to talk to you about the social and cultural issues of the time. There was a big sense of environmentalism during this decade. Americans were protesting what they believed were assaults on the environment, such as the Love Canal of New York and the nuclear power plant disaster at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. Also, the oil crisis in the late 1970s brought further attention to the issue of preserving the environment. Notably, the first Earth Day was celebrated in 1970. Also, in the 1970s, there were still many Americans who fought for women's rights. After many years of campaigning by feminists, the Equal Rights Amendment was passed. It reads, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be abridged or denied by any state or account of sex." This amendment was quickly ratified by 22 out of 38 necessary states, and then activists against the amendment mobilized it and defeated it. Indiana became the 35th and last state to ratifying it, causing the amendment to be a failure. After this, many feminists turned against politics and began to create communities of their own, with their own bookstores, libraries, grocery stores, and restaurants. Also during the 1970s, there was a strong anti-war sentiment boiling up in the U.S. When the U.S. invaded Cambodia, Americans were not pleased, filling up the streets with protests and banners calling for the end of the Vietnam War. And if you can't read behind me, this poster says, "Get the hell out of Vietnam." Also, college campuses were hosts to protests. In 1970, 4 National Guard men shot and killed 4 students that were protesting at Kent State University. Just 10 days later, police officers killed 2 students at Jackson State University under the same circumstances. Both of these stories swept the nation. They were all over newspapers and news channels. I remember having to cover these 2 stories. It was not a pretty sight. After these 2 incidents, the protests died down, and it is safe to say that the American people will be happy when this war is over. And now, here's Chris with science and technology.
The 1970s has been a decade to remember in terms of technology and inventions. Let's go year by year and look at the great inventions that have been, well, invented. We started off in 1970 with the creation of the jumbo jet, the largest, fastest commercial plane that we've ever seen. The following year will be one remembered for the decade, with the creation of the floppy disk for storing data on computers, the pocket calculator, and the microprocessor. In 1972, the word processor was invented. 1973 was a unique year for inventions, as genetically modified organisms were first seen, as well as disposable lighters made by Bic. In 1974, we saw the first post-it notes in Rubik's Cube, something I still can't solve 6 years later. In 1975, we experienced the first digital camera in Altair 8000, which was made by Bill Gates and Paul Allen. In 1976, the first Apple computer was created by Steve Jobs. Along with it, the first inkjet printer was made. In 1977, the MRI was made, a device that lets you see the anatomy of your body without surgery or harmful x-rays. The computer game Space Invaders was created in 1978, which led to a craze for computer games. In that same year, the spreadsheet was also created for the aid of computer users. We finished off this year, 1979, with the Sony Walkman, a portable radio, as well as the Atari microprocessor.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Channel 8 News on this last day of the 1970s.
We'll see you tomorrow, January 1st, 1980. The 80s can't possibly compare to the 70s.
Amen to that. I would like to thank all the tech producers, directors, scene producers. They've done a great job this past year. With Chris Metzger, I'm Gene Castleberg, signing off.
Cheers.
All right, great job, guys.
Hey, good job. Looking good over there.
Even though this broadcast was seemingly perfect, stay tuned for some blemishes that we had during this production. pop and soul music.
Hey, it's not the right one.
Oh, okay. There's so many more hits.
What the hell? Dude, it was literally on the next one.
There's so many more hits of the 1970s.
Dude, what the hell?
What the hell?
That doesn't make sense to me. Son of a bitch! Dude, that is rough. Reading that.
Other hits. Damn it. God.
As well as an increase in wages.
Pause.
What's going on? Increase in houses due to people. Dude, I gotta start this over. I messed up like 15 times.
Good to go?
What was that? Just rolled.
You ready?
Let me catch my breath.
Alright.
Do your thing. Come on, shake it up. Shake it up.
Calling for the end of war. If you can't read this, shit.
That's my bad.
That's alright.
It's alright.
It's alright.
Damn! As soon as I looked up, you looked back, and then you.
Oh.
Image.
We gotta start that over.
Shit.
I messed that. Yeah. This leads to a rapid increase in houses. Dude, what?
Good.
Eatington, dude.